stars, I will be there.
I'm Monica Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear. Little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
Losing a child on its own is more than enough to bear in one lifetime. But imagine losing 3 brothers before that and witnessing your mother's unimaginable grief while navigating sibling loss. Then, in a 17-month span, watching both of your parents die. And 2 years later, hearing the news that your only child, at just 22 years of age, was killed in a car accident. Darlene Sforza calls this layered grief. As she searches for her purpose in life, along the way, she is finding hope in sharing her story of survival and grace in honoring her son, Matthew. Colby and I are so humbled to hold the light with Darlene Sforza. Welcome to the podcast. We appreciate you being here, Darlene. It's been 2 years this March since the passing of your only son, Matthew, who died suddenly in a terrible car accident. He was just 22. And losing an only child, I imagine, adds a whole other dimension to child loss grief, as does losing a sibling, which you have experienced 3 times, in addition to the deaths of both of your parents. So much loss. And yet, you are here. I just want to start by asking you, are you surprised some days by your own resilience?
I definitely am so surprised. Losing 3 brothers and watching my mother deal with the deaths of her sons, and then losing my mother in 2020, and then losing my father in 2021, just 17 months after my mom. It's been a lot of loss, but nothing can prepare me for the loss of my only child.
Definitely. The death of a child is considered the most difficult grief a person can ever experience. And for me, it's not only that my daughter Cassidy isn't here, but I also grieve for the future I envisioned for her and Colby together and our whole family. And you, tragically, have experienced so much loss. How do you feel child loss grief is different than any other that you have experienced?
It definitely is. And only child, I will never watch him get married. I will never dance with him at his wedding. I've thought about so many of the things. He wanted to open up a business. I'm never going to be a part of that. Or watch him be a dad if he was going to be, or me or Scott be grandparents. So yeah, it's a lot of the future. I'm grieving the now, but I'm also grieving the future.
If you can you tell us about the day you got the phone call about your son's accident? What happened to Matthew?
So March 18th, Matt had gone out with some friends. Me and my husband were going out with our friends, and Matt was going to be going out with his friends. So Matt had come upstairs on March 18th, and he had a dressy shirt on. I said to him, "You look nice." He says, "I'm going to head out with some friends." And my husband and I said what we always said. We said, "We love you, have fun, and be safe." Things that we have said so many times over the years. Never did we realize those would be the last words we'd be saying to him while he was on this earth, because I still do talk to Matt. So March 19th, I believe it was around 8:45, 2 police officers came to our door. It was a Sunday morning. My husband answered the door, and the officers asked if he was home alone. He says, no, he wasn't. His wife was sleeping. They told him at that moment there was an accident and Matt had passed away. Scott proceeded to wake me up and told me the news that would forever change our lives. They asked us if we wanted to call anyone. And I remember asking the officers, "Are you sure it was Matt? Could somebody else have been driving his car? Could this, I mean, the shock. I had come out of my room to see two officers standing in my living room. And yeah, disbelief, complete disbelief. And they had assured me that indeed it was Matt. And that is when our lives changed.
How did you initially cope? I mean, what do you remember about the early stages of your grief?
Um,
Or do you remember?
I remember in the beginning, the tears weren't coming. And I guess the shock was so bad. I don't know, because I remember the first couple of days I was not crying. I was just sitting there, just staring, just in disbelief, like still waiting for him to walk up the stairs, still waiting for this not to be true.
Yeah, did
Um,
you wake up? I remember waking up and going, "Oh, thank God that was a dream." And then coming to the realization that it wasn't.
so many times,
Yeah.
so many times. So he had passed on a Sunday, and we had had his funeral on the following Saturday. And I just was in shock of the amount of people that had showed up. He was definitely loved by more than me and my husband, and it was so nice to see. We had so much support. We did have some family members who were not as supportive, unfortunately. And until you have gone through child loss, you don't understand. And I would not want anybody to understand, because that does mean they had lost a child. I definitely struggle with my everyday life. I struggle with my purpose. I was Matt's mom for 22 years. I mean, I'm definitely a wife to Scott, but I loved being a mom to Matt. For 22 years, I loved it. I did everything I could. We took him places, we did everything with him, and we loved him. So much has changed. The house feels empty. Our family of three, we are now a couple. And I thank God he's my biggest supporter. I would be so lost without him. He tries to be strong for me, and he holds in a lot, I believe.
So, along that line, have your relationships with your family and friends changed dramatically? And how has that impacted your ability to cope with your grief?
Yes, a couple family members, for my own well being, I've had to cut out of my life. They were not saying helpful things. We have had some people who say things, but I think their intent was not to be rude. I think that it's just uneducated. So I am trying very hard to make people aware of what's helpful and what's not. I want people to understand that it's okay to sit with somebody in silence. It is okay to just hold their hands. I have a very good friend, and she has been my biggest supporter. And that's what she does. She comes to my house and she just holds my hand, and she's just there with me. And she knows sometimes words don't have to be spoken, because sometimes when words are spoken at that time, sometimes they're not the best. And I don't think that they're doing it on purpose, but sometimes they just want to fill that void.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason that we do this podcast is just really to educate people about grief. We are living in a grief illiterate society where it's easier just not to do anything about it or sometimes to say the wrong thing. So it's very important that you're sharing that with us. I want to ask you, where do you think Matthew is now? And I know there was an accident site. And so do you visit that site? I know a lot of families do that.
Yes, we do visit it. It actually happened right in front of my husband's work. So I had asked my husband, "Do you want me to put something by it?" And he says he wanted it decorated. So we do put a cross there. for the holidays, we put a Christmas tree, and then we are now going to be changing it for the holidays. And because it's going to affect him the most. I can go different ways, and I don't have to go buy it, but it's going to affect him the most. So he wanted it decorated. So we definitely do that. It's very hard to go to the scene, but I still do it. We do everything we do to keep our children's memory alive.
Agreed. And,
Yeah,
you're really early in your grief, so you're just
I
finding
am.
ways to find some kind of peace.
Yes. We have made a garden in the front of our house, and I had a vision in my head of what I wanted in the garden. Matt loved to golf and he loved to fish. And so I had said to my husband, I want half golfing and half fishing. And so he had made my vision come to life. We got all these decorations that a lot of people donated. And on the other side, we did a little fishing with some blue rocks, and it came out really nice. And we did some solar lights, so we watch it from our window at night.
I love
Um,
that.
and we used his old boat that we cut in half, and yeah, and we put some decorations on that and his life jacket. And as much as we do in memory of Matt, it's so hard because we're only doing it because he's not here. But like every parent, we want to keep that memory alive. And I remember my mother saying the day before she passed, please keep the boy's memory alive. And I do that. And I definitely do that on their birthdays and anniversaries.
Yes, you lost three brothers. Let's talk about that for just a moment. Can you tell us their names, and were they older than you are, and when and how did they die?
Yes. My mother was married. Her first husband, they had 5 boys. Her second husband, she had my sister and myself. So all three of my brothers were older than me. My first brother, Andy, had passed away in 1991 from alcohol. He was 30 years old, but he had lived such a life where he looked so much older than 30. And we'll never forget the day. It was a Wednesday, and I was home from hairdressing school, and the police officer had called and had said they were looking for my mother. And at that time, we couldn't call directly. We called and said it was an emergency. My mother called back. I was crying, and she says, "It's Andy, isn't it?" And I said, "It is." We went to the hospital. I was 20 at the time. I was 10 years younger. So we both went in and identified him in the morgue. I never got over that image in my head.
And that was probably your first experience with grief.
Yes, because my grandparents had passed away when I was younger, but I didn't really, I was 7 and 10, and I don't remember a lot of that. And to watch my mother during the grief process, I watched my strong mother who could barely get out of bed. And people think, grieving parents are so strong, but we only show them what we want to show them. I mean, we have to put a mask on sometimes.
Especially that generation probably did too, right?
Yeah. And I really wish that there was grief classes and more resources.
Mm.
And if there was, she did not take advantage of them. But I mean, she really went into the Bible and she studied and she met with friends for Bible studies. And so that is how she had a strong faith in God. And so that is what had gotten her through, I think. And I am struggling with my faith. So I am trying. But so that was my brother Andy. That was in 1991. Um, and in 2014, my brother Joe had passed away from a heart attack. And the following year in 2015, my brother Ken had passed away. And he was in a car accident in 1990. And he was in a coma for 3.5 weeks. And when he got out of the coma, he definitely was not the same. He was a traumatic brain injury. And he was a rough, tough guy before, and he was very childlike after. And So he lived like that from 1990 until 2015. And so, and those two losses between Joe and Ken were so close together. And that's when I believe my mother's health problems had really deteriorated.
You can see how that would happen.
Yes, it took quite a toll on her. But I remember my mother always saying, I want to be with the boys. I want to be with the boys. And I said, Mom, what about us? You can't leave us. And I'm thinking, I get it now. I get it. And because I have thought about it and I had promised my husband I wouldn't. And I reach out to friends and I do whatever I have to, but it is something that does cross my mind. And it had crossed my mother's mind. And I'm thinking back how selfish of me to do that and to say that because she had lost three children. I didn't know what it was to lose children at that time, but I would go over her house and I'd give her flowers and I'd hug her. I'd go over on their anniversaries or their birthdays. And I knew she was sad. I knew she was depressed, but I didn't know firsthand what it was like.
Well, how could you?
Right.
But now that you have, I mean, you must. Do you look back on your mom's grief and think about how some things are the same and some things are different in the
Yes.
way you grieved your children?
Yes, I do. So a lot of similarities. Yes. I remember my mother not getting out of bed so many times, and that has been me. There's days like Christmas, I could not get out of bed. Grief definitely comes in waves. There's days that I feel like I'm doing okay, and then days it brings me right back to the beginning. But yeah, watching my mother go through this three times, I wish she was here and I wish I could hug her and say, Mom, I get it. I am so, so sorry that you had to do this three times. I could not even imagine two more times of this.
In terms of reflecting upon those experiences, with your siblings, what through those experiences of grief did you kind of reflect on and want to do differently with reflecting on your son? Because I just know, kind of listening to you guys talk, and some other individuals in my life who I really looked up to because they had lost a sibling but they were adults in my life when I was in high school. Even they just didn't have the tools to communicate it. You could almost tell that this was something that was very hush hush in their family. They didn't really get to express the grief that maybe they had felt or were still feeling about that loss. And so I'm wondering if, what you learned about yourself, about grief during those experiences that have allowed you to be different with Matthew, like making the garden, for example, and decorating, the accident site, things like that.
Yes, from the get go, we have always wanted to talk about Matt. I have found resources early on, and some people were quite surprised because it took them years. And I have gone to Grief Share and I have reached out and I've read books and I've watched videos. And back then I just don't think there was the resources for my mom. Um, so it's a little different, but I definitely have learned a lot from watching her. And I mean, everybody says she was so strong, just like they think I am, but it's not always that way.
And you also must have missed her support and her guidance when you lost Matthew.
I so did. My mother was my best friend. She was my biggest supporter in everything. And I wanted to call her and say, Mom, what do I do? What's my next step? I definitely don't know. Me and my husband are in shock and lost. I mean, we had, some family members in the beginning who were helpful, getting us through the process because how do you even do a funeral when we were in shock. We didn't know what to do. We went to the funeral home and I just remember I have had friends who had lost their children and a couple of them thought maybe I should see Matt after he passed, and I knew for my own well-being I did not want that. I wanted to remember Matt how he was, and I remember the vision of my brother Andy, and I did not want that for Matt. I did not want that vision of Matt in my head. Of course, I have put my own visions, but I remember being at the funeral home, and I remember we were doing all talking about the arrangements. And I remember thinking, Matt is downstairs. It took a toll. Like I was just like, he is in the same building with me. I did not want to see him. My husband had saw the car, and he made sure that I didn't see it. He says, there's nothing good that's going to come out of it. I don't want you to see it. I don't want you to. So he had taken a lot of the strength and carried me through it. And I'm like, but who's going to carry you through? You need help too. But I think as a guy, he holds a lot in and tries to be the strong one.
He sounds like such a amazing, lovingly protective man. So
Yep.
I'm grateful that you have him in your life.
And I had a family member who said, I had read that some marriages just don't survive this. And maybe that is so, but who else would know it better than him? He knows my pain. He knows, I mean, he loved Matt so much. He was a wonderful father. So I, he knows. There's like, I am so glad that we are staying together and being supportive through this.
You also told me how hard it is to celebrate Mother's Day after your only child dies. You said you didn't feel like a mother anymore, which I have to share with you just shattered my heart. So
Yeah.
tell us about that. And we're coming up on Mother's Day again, and I'm wondering how you feel about that now.
Well, Matt had passed away on March 19th, and 3 weeks after that, it was Easter. And I remember going over to our families on Easter and thinking Matt should be here. I felt like a fish out of water. I felt so uncomfortable being there without Matt, and Scott did too. So we stayed there for a little while, and then I said, I'm ready to go. I can't do this. Um, and then for Mother's Day, I said, you know what, Scott, let's just go away. We'll go to Bar Harbor because I don't have a mom and I'm not a mom. I just want to be away. And so, of course, in my mind, I'm thinking it would be a little bit better, but I remember crying in the restaurants and crying ever in the stores. And so it was a different location, but my heart was still the same. It was still broken.
Do you feel any differently about that now? Because I just feel so strongly that once a mom, always a mom, even if they're not physically here.
Um, I am struggling with my purpose because I don't have any other children, and I felt like Matt was my purpose. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I love Scott with my whole heart, but being a mother is just it's just a different relationship.
So
And I know people have said, once a mom, always a mom, and I really, really want to believe that, but I just am not there yet.
and you may never be,
Yep.
and that's okay too.
Hmm.
When did your parents pass away, you said?
My mom had passed away on July 4th, 2020. She had a lot of health issues, and I think stemming from the deaths of my brothers. So she had heart problems and kidney problems. And the doctor had called me at work one day and said, there's nothing else we could do. Even if she does dialysis, it's not going to fix her heart. Like she's got too many problems. We made sure we FaceTimed and we had all the relatives go and say goodbye to mom. My mom was ready. We were not. My mom had everything organized on her whole funeral arrangements, on the poems that she wanted read, the pastors who she wanted to say the message. She had verses. I mean, she had everything done but the obituary. They gave her the morphine, and it took 12 hours for her to pass. Very, very difficult to watch my best friend pass away. It was life changing. My dad moved in with us the next day. I saw his grief. I am grieving as a daughter, but watching him grieve as a husband, heartbreaking. And I saw his health deteriorate, and he passed 17 months from COVID. He passed December 27th of 2021. So I have a lot of layered grief. my brothers, my mom, my dad. The layered grief, I've lost 3 people so close to me within 3 years.
We're pausing here to let you know we're trying something new this season. We want to hear from you. If there is something you've learned in your grief journey that might be helpful for others, we invite you to leave us a voicemail message. I promise to listen to everyone. Some might even be used in a future Holding the Light episode. You're also welcome to just let us know what you think of this podcast. You can suggest a topic or request to be a guest. The number to call and leave a voicemail is 617-302-7373. We can't wait to hear from you. That's 617-302-7373. The number is also in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to our conversation. I would think each loss adds this emotional weight. How have you managed to even separate the grief for all the people you love?
Yeah, I have a really hard time separating because I was still grieving mom when dad had passed, still grieving dad when Matt passed. And then we had lost my father-in-law last July. It's been a lot and so much loss so soon. I have a good support system. I have wonderful friends, and I do have a lot of good family members. I have had some that were not so helpful, but I have had a lot of good family members, friends. I have had a lot of support are the ones who have lost the children, who know firsthand what this pain feels like, the nightmare that we don't wake up from.
That is a common thread among our guests too, is that they find most of the support from people who have experienced the same or something similar. Nothing is the same, but similar loss.
I struggle with the whys. I had 2 miscarriages. I had biopsies. I had surgeries. I had so much to get to the point of having our healthy baby boy. And we found out later his name, Matthew, meant gift of God. And so he was our everything. And to be taken away at 22. And I know some people say, but you had 22 years. And I'm like, it was not enough. It was so not enough. So putting into perspective, as much as I miss my parents, 79 and 87 compared to 22, it was the order. My son leaving at 22 was not the order. I remember my mom saying she wanted to write a book. She always felt like there was another woman. And I feel like that. I feel like I am watching a movie, like this isn't my life. I'm feeling like there's another, like this doesn't seem like it's me.
Have you found that there's any resources out there that are to help you, professional resources?
There are resources, and my husband actually, I had gone to Grief Share when my parents had passed away, and I had gone a little bit after they had passed, and I was 2 weeks almost done with it, and then Matt had passed away. When my father-in-law had passed away, I had asked Scott if he wanted to go for Grief Share, and he had gone. But I thank God for the resources, the books, the podcast. I do, because I would not have a clue what to do. I mean, even watching my mother firsthand to go through it, there's nothing that could prepare you for this.
So looking back over the last, it's only been 2 years. What do you think you've learned about yourself through this journey of grief?
I think that I know grief makes people uncomfortable, and I'm trying very hard to make it more comfortable. It's okay to talk about. It's okay to not be okay. I think that the big things don't matter to me anymore. It puts things into a different perspective. I'm definitely grateful for small things, but things that I used to, big things don't matter like they used to. I think perspective is definitely changed.
Do you think you're doing a good job of giving yourself grace?
I guess it depends on the day. There's some days I feel like I do, and there's other days that I was like, I did not give myself grace today. I did not. I tell other people it's okay to not be okay, but sometimes it's harder to tell yourself.
That's so true. What would you say to someone who is newly grieving the loss of their only child and just feels completely overwhelmed by the pain? What experience and wisdom do you think you can share?
I would basically tell them that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not do everything on your own, and be specific what you want. I am very grateful that we had um, Herman Baptist that had stepped up and gave us almost 2 weeks worth of food. And even though Scott and I weren't, having big appetites, we had a lot of people coming in and out all the time. So that was one thing we didn't have to worry about. But be more specific. Like, instead of saying, I want help, could you do my laundry? Could you pick up an errand? Anything that you could do would be helpful.
It's hard to manage that.
Yeah. But I definitely want people to know that, like I said before, it's okay to just sit with somebody, just listen. Sometimes we just need somebody to listen. We don't need the advice. And I have heard a lot of advice that some is very helpful and some is not. And I let people know that was not probably the best advice. But, and in your heart of hearts, in the intent, I don't think that you meant for it to come out like that, because I think that people don't know what they don't know. When you go through it, you learn so much.
Well, Darlene, I think that that is giving yourself grace.
Hmm. Yes.
So, bereaved parents often share many ways that honor their children. I would love to hear how you continue to honor and remember Matthew.
Matt's first birthday in heaven, we did a butterfly garden. We released butterflies and we shared a lot of stories, and it was wonderful um, listening to all of his friends and family talk about things. That's one thing. Like, Scott and I could go on and hear about, we could talk about Matt all day, but to hear other people talk about Matt and how much they loved him, that speaks volumes. Like, we paint rocks in Matt's memory and we put sayings on them, or we have designs, and we meet groups and they meet at our house and we put them out. And the goal is to put a smile on people's face when they find it. And we put them all over. They've traveled the world. Um, we continue to keep his tree decorated at his site. We do the garden. We have made bracelets. And then we had shirts that were made, and it was a golfer on the back in memory of Matt Sforza with the dates. We did a silent auction and we raised quite a bit of money, and that's going to go for a scholarship. And so we are doing a scholarship for a Herman student going to UMaine or a community college, and we're doing $2,000 a year for a business management degree.
That's amazing.
Yes, it is. And so we get to pick the student. We will read the essays and then we will go to the event, and it will be bittersweet for sure. We did a four-wheeling event. We did an auction, a fundraising there. And that was at Wildwood Restaurant, is where we had met. And that's where Matt had gone with his Lakeside Lawn Care. They had gone on a four-wheeling trip to Wildwood. So we definitely wanted to do the same. We had his workers plant a tree in front of our house that I keep solar lights on all the time. We've done quite a bit to keep his memory alive. It's beautiful to see the bracelets and the shirts that people wear, but it's still hard at the same time to see them.
I can tell you from experience, 10 years later, it still takes my breath away to see somebody wearing a Shine on Cash shirt.
Yeah. We have decals that we had gotten on our vehicles that somebody had made for us. And Scott's on the back of his truck is a big fishing boat, and it's a father and a son in the boat. And mine is memory of my son, and it's got the angel wings on the side. But then Scott had decided, Matt had a boat that he had purchased and he had hardly used it. And Scott had always called Matt little buddy. And so he wanted to put on his boat, Little Buddy. And we had gotten tattoos in his honor. So Matt was wearing a pendant, and nobody knows where he got it. And I wish somebody knew. It was Joshua 1:9. It was a Bible verse about being strong and courageous, and it meant a lot to him. So I ended up getting that pendant verse as a tattoo. And I got the last Mother's Day card. I used Love Matt, and I put that on a tattoo with golfing and fishing. And my husband put Little Buddy on his tattoo. Matt wanted a tattoo, and he was not at the age to get one, and he wanted me to sign. And I said, Matt, you could just wait until you're 18 to get one. I was like, and I don't know why when he was 18, he didn't get it for some reason. I don't know. But so my husband did that crest, and he put angel wings. He added to it, which was beautiful.
That is beautiful.
Yes,
Oh, thank you for sharing all of that.
absolutely.
So in closing, we would like to give you the opportunity to share, Darlene, how would you want the world to remember your son, Matthew?
Matt had a big heart. He had a smile that would light up a room. He was such a handsome guy. Um, he had a contagious laugh. Some friends said it was annoying, but we thought it was contagious. He was a very quiet guy, but when he spoke, listen, because it was going to be important. He was a lot like my dad, very quiet, but when they spoke, listen up because it's going to be important. Matt was a high achiever. He didn't give up. If Matt wanted something, he was going to get it. He put his mind to it, and he was an achiever. He was wonderful in all the sports, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. Like, he did so much in his short 22 years. Matt loved the outdoors. He was a golfer. He liked to fish. Matt liked Zach Bryan. I still have a hard time when I hear Zach Bryan, Pink Skies. It just reminds me of Matt. I want people to remember how Matt lived and not focus on how he died. He did so much in 22 years. And I sometimes think that people are so focused on that he wasn't wearing a seatbelt or he was driving too fast, but I want them to focus more on how he lived. Because as hard as it is, and as much as I hate to accept it, it was Matt's time to go. So no matter what, that was his time on March 19th.
Well, I think you are remarkable, Darlene. The way you have persevered through so much loss, it's unimaginable to me. And the way you really do give yourself grace, I think, to grieve, and your selflessness and sharing your story with our listeners. And I believe you will find your purpose. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for letting me share my story.
As long as you love.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as you love. As long as you love.